Hello, anatomy friends. And in this last video of the musculoskeletal content, I can't believe we're here now. We are going to focus on the muscles of the leg and the foot. So distal most portions here. We have 2 slides worth of learning objectives again. There will be 3 muscle compartments in the leg, and one of those muscle compartments can be further subdivided. So we have a learning objective for each one. And then I want you to know the basics of the muscles of the foot, as well as a really dominant structure in the plantar foot, the plantar aponeurosis. This is my last plea for you to make sure you are answering these in your own words. This will really help you gauge your understanding of the topic, and then you can always go back and review to fill in the blanks or areas of confusion from there. So we will start with the leg and with the anterior compartment of the leg, meaning it's located anterior to the interosseous membrane between the tibia and the fibula. There are going to be 4 muscles in this compartment. I'm not going to have you know all of the names of these muscles, but I do want you to know one, and that is the tibialis anterior. Sometimes it's just abbreviated to TA. It is the most prominent and superficial of these muscles. The entire anterior compartment of the leg is actually kind of laterally placed, but not as lateral as the muscles of the lateral compartment. And this is because the medial portion of the anterior leg is actually just the tibia itself. There are portions of the tibia that are not covered by muscles and are very easily palpable when running your fingers down the anterior leg. If you've ever heard of the term shin splints, these typically are caused by little microtraumas, little tears within the tibialis anterior, and that can actually lead to damage to the periosteum of the tibia itself. And usually, this is an overuse or potentially high impact injury, and it will cause edema or swelling and pain, usually in the distal 2/3 portion of the tibia. The deep fibular nerve will innervate this anterior compartment. Let's talk actions in the anterior compartment. This is the compartment that holds the dorsiflexors of the ankle, primarily that tibialis anterior muscle. The other muscles in this compartment are primarily responsible for extension of the digits of the foot. So that would be the extensor digitorum longus and extensor hallucis longus. And then depending on the muscle in this compartment, that muscle could play a role in inversion or eversion. A rule of thumb is that the muscles that have a tibialis in its name will play a role in inversion. If it has a fibularis in its name, it will have a role in eversion. So what role do you think the tibialis anterior plays in inversion or eversion? Well, it has a tibialis in its name, so it will invert. There is another muscle in this compartment called the fibularis tertius. What do you think it does? It will evert the foot. Let's talk about some other everters, the muscles in the lateral compartment of the leg. This is definitely the smallest compartment of the leg. It actually only consists of 2 muscles. These are the fibularis longus, which is longer, as its name would suggest. It's also superficial to the fibularis brevis. These both have fibularis in their names, so we know that they are going to evert the foot, and these are the primary everters of the foot. And they will also play a supportive role in terms of plantar flexion of the ankle. These muscles are innervated by the other terminal branch of the common fibular nerve, the superficial fibular nerve. Now, I do want to note, so the sciatic nerve is the largest nerve in the body, and it will subdivide into 2 nerves. The tibial nerve, which is going to head posterior, and the common fibular, or sometimes you hear common peroneal nerve. That's the more traditional term. So the common fibular will fairly quickly split into the superficial fibular and the deep fibular. So that deep fibular is going to innervate the anterior compartment of the leg, and the superficial fibular is innervating this lateral compartment. All right. Moving to the largest component of the leg, that's going to be the posterior compartment. And this is so large that it is further subdivided by an intermuscular septum into a superficial and a deep subcompartment. The superficial subcompartment is the biggest. It's the more functionally important. And when someone is thinking of the calf muscles, they are thinking about the muscles in this superficial subcompartment of the posterior compartment of the leg. And it's composed of two relatively large muscles. You're going to have the gastrocnemius, which is superficial, and it actually has two heads. And then so that these two heads will actually cross the knee joint. And then you'll have the soleus muscle, which is deep to the gastrocnemius and wider. And these muscles will share a common tendon that will attach on the calcaneus. And the tendon is called the calcaneal tendon. But most people call this the Achilles tendon. Now, if you aren't familiar with Greek mythology, this name seems pretty odd, the Achilles tendon. So a real quick lesson. Achilles was a Greek hero. He was dipped in the river Styx by his mother when he was a baby to make him immortal. But she held him by his heel during this process, so the river water did not touch that spot, leaving the specific spot where the calcaneal tendon is vulnerable. So later in life, during the Trojan War, a poisoned arrow hit that spot where the calcaneal tendon is, causing his death, although it was thought he was immortal. So a little Greek mythology lesson there. And I note this because you very rarely hear anyone say the calcaneal tendon. You almost always hear people say the Achilles tendon. It's just one of those non-scientific names that's always used rather than the actual name. All right, so back to the anatomy world. The calcaneal tendon is the largest tendon of the body. The major actions of this compartment is going to be plantar flexion of the ankle. And these are the primary plantar flexors, so much so that, say, if you had an injury to these muscles or the calcaneal tendon, the other muscles that play a synergistic role in plantar flexion can't really produce the movement effectively enough without these muscles. So it is hugely important in terms of plantar flexion of the ankle. Now, since the gastrocnemius crosses the knee joint as well, it can play a role in flexion of the knee. In fact, when the knee is flexed, only the soleus is really capable of plantar flexion effectively. These muscles are innervated by the tibial nerve, and note we are in the posterior compartment, and we know that the tibial nerve equals posterior. Moving to the deep posterior compartment of the leg, there are four muscles here. You do not have to learn their names, but you do need to know the basics of this subcompartment. The major action of these muscles is to flex the digits. So it's going to have long tendons that are reaching all the way to the digits. So that would be the flexor digitorum longus and the flexor hallucis longus. Hallucis is going to mean having to do with the first digit or the big toe. Many of these muscles will play a weak role. That's a hard thing to say. A weak role in terms of plantar flexion. There is a muscle in this region called the tibialis posterior. So it inverts the foot because it has tibialis in its name. In fact, this is the strongest inverter of the foot. And there is one muscle, the popliteus muscle, which will weakly flex the knee. So it's crossing the knee joint. And this is still in the posterior compartment, so it is also innervated by the tibial nerve. Moving to the foot, We will start with the dorsal foot or the top of the foot. And there are only two intrinsic muscles here and many long tendons from the leg. And these muscles are going to be the extensor hallucis brevis, as well as the extensor digitorum brevis. And as their name would suggest, they play a role in terms of extension of the digits. And these muscles are innervated by the deep fibular nerve, which makes sense. Remember, what other compartment is innervated by the deep fibular nerve? The anterior compartment of the leg, which is right above the dorsum of the foot. So it just continues from the anterior compartment into the dorsal foot. Moving to the plantar surface of the foot, where most of the action is happening. But before we talk about these muscles, I want to talk about an important structure that is located superficial to the muscles called the plantar aponeurosis. Really, the plantar aponeurosis is going to be the central portion of the deep fascia covering the plantar surface. And it's notable because it's quite a bit thicker in this central portion. It's thicker than the surrounding fascia, and it will extend from the calcaneus and form these digital slips that will head up, as the name would suggest, to the digit. So you're going to have 5 different digital slips. Now, as you can imagine, when the foot is hitting the ground during locomotion, there is a lot of stress and a lot of weight on the plantar surface of the foot. And this plantar aponeurosis plays a supportive role and supports the medial longitudinal arch, importantly. And this arch is very important. It's the main arch of the foot, and that is important for shock absorption and flexibility of the foot. So every single ground strike isn't, a traumatic event because we have this plantar aponeurosis as well as that medial longitudinal arch. But sometimes with overuse of this region, particularly after a time of inactivity, think taking a really long hike or a jog after not doing something like that for years, you can cause tear or damage to this aponeurosis, and this can lead to plantar fasciitis, which presents with pain around the bottom of the calcaneus, where the plantar aponeurosis begins. All right, on to the plantar muscles of the foot, and there are very many, and they are generally subdivided into 3 or 4 layers, depending on the source that you look at. The illustration on the right has 3 different layers. Again, you don't need to know any specific names, but I do want you to know some of the basics, like the major actions and the innervation. So action-wise, many of these muscles will play a role in terms of flexion of the digits. However, there are some muscles, specifically the lumbricals and the interossei muscles, which you actually have lumbricals and interossei in the hand as well. But these muscles will play a role in terms of extension of the interphalangeal joints. So different muscles in this region can have antagonistic roles. Speaking of antagonistic roles, some of the muscles will play a role in terms of abduction as well as adduction of the digits. These muscles are innervated by the medial and lateral plantar nerves, which are the terminal branches of the tibial nerve. Think of that tibial nerve traveling down through the posterior compartment of the leg, then it reaches the back of the ankle and splits into these nerves. Note that all the muscles of the leg and the foot are innervated by branches derived from the sciatic nerve. So sciatic nerve is of utmost importance here, but of course we want to be more specific in terms of innervation when we're describing that. So just saying in general, the sciatic nerve innervates the leg and the foot. While technically true, it's branches, and we can be more specific in terms of that answer. All right, last practice question of the unit, and another second order question. The question is, damage to the superficial fibular nerve could most greatly affect which action? Pause the video if needed, and then let's discuss. So in the stem, we are talking about the superficial fibular nerve. we need to remember which compartment that innervates to better understand which actions could be affected. So which muscle compartment is innervated by the superficial fibular? Hopefully you remember that the superficial fibular nerve innervates the lateral compartment of the leg. So then you need to remember, what is the primary action of the lateral compartment of the leg? What do you think? Well, hopefully you're landing on B, eversion of the foot. The fibularis longus and brevis are the primary everters of the foot. They also play a role in plantar flexion, which is not one of our answer choices here, but eversion still would have been the better answer because that is its dominant role. Looking at these other answer choices, what compartment has the dorsiflexors of the ankle? That would be the anterior compartment of the leg. And what innervates that compartment? The deep fibular nerve. Very good. I know you got that right. Which compartment or compartments have the muscles that extend the toes? Well, that's actually two different compartments. You have the anterior compartment of the leg as well as the dorsal muscles of the foot, but both of those are innervated by the deep fibular nerve. It is true that one of the muscles in the anterior compartment of the leg, the fibularis tertius, does play a role in eversion of the foot, but plays a supportive role to the muscles in the lateral compartment. Inversion of the foot, it's a bit trickier. This has muscles in different compartments, both the anterior and posterior compartments of the leg. So a little bit of a trickier answer choice there, but really we're landing on B, eversion of the foot being the correct answer. Excellent. Thank you so much for your time and attention throughout our whole discussion of the musculoskeletal unit. It has been an absolute pleasure. Best wishes in your studies.